I'm Amelia, 35 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the responsible one, the fixer, the daughter my parents never had to worry about. After 30 sleepless hours traveling home from my husband's overseas funeral, this was supposed to be the moment my family finally showed up for me. But as I stood alone at baggage claim, my phone buzzed with a message from my brother, Troy. 5 simple words hit me like a physical blow. "We are busy. Try Uber. Just try Uber." The feeling of being utterly abandoned, right there in the middle of the crowded airport, almost brought me to my knees. But I had no idea that while they were enjoying their dinner parties, a chain of events was unfolding that would put our private texts on the 10 o'clock news. If you've ever felt invisible to your own family, let me know where you're watching from. And make sure you hit like and subscribe, because you won't believe what happened next. The only bright spot in my family life, the one person who saw me for who I was and not just what I could do for them, was James. Meeting him in college felt like coming up for air after a lifetime of holding my breath. He didn't see the family fixer, or the responsible daughter, or the girl who paid her own way. He just saw me. He saw the fire in my eyes when I talked about my ambitions, and he didn't try to put it out. He fanned the flames. When I told him about my family, about the constant double standards with my brother, Troy, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He just listened. And then he said something that stuck with me forever. He said, "Your worth isn't determined by their inability to see it." It was the permission I never knew I needed. After we got married, that support became the foundation of everything I built for myself. I poured all the energy I used to spend trying to earn my family's approval into my career in marketing, and it paid off. I started as a junior coordinator, the person fetching coffee and taking notes, but I was hungry. I stayed late. I volunteered for the projects nobody else wanted. I learned every aspect of the business, from digital analytics to brand strategy. While my brother was still figuring out his passion, which usually involved a new expensive hobby funded by my parents, I was climbing. I became a senior coordinator in 18 months, manager in 3 years. My boss, a tough-as-nails VP named Sarah, saw the hustle. She saw that I wasn't just doing a job. I was building a career, brick by painful brick. She started giving me more responsibility, bigger accounts, and more complex campaigns. There were nights James would find me asleep on the couch, my laptop still open on my chest, with spreadsheets burned into my vision. He'd just gently close the screen, pull a blanket over me, and leave a fresh cup of coffee for me on the table for when I inevitably woke up at 3 a.m. with a new idea. My family, of course, barely noticed. To them, my job was just a job, something to pay the bills. When I got promoted to marketing director at 32, a huge step in my career, I called my mom to share the news. Her response? "Oh, that's nice, dear. By the way, Troy's thinking of getting into real estate. Do you think your company could use someone to find them a new office?" It was always like that. My achievements were just stepping stones for my brother's next whim. My father was even worse. He once told me, in all seriousness, that my career was good practice for managing a household someday. Good practice. As if leading a team of 15 people and managing a multi-million-dollar budget was somehow comparable to scheduling playdates. But their blindness became my shield. It allowed me to build something for myself, in secret. 2 years ago, I was handed the biggest project of my career. Our company was launching a new flagship product, a complete game changer in our industry. The pressure was immense. The stakes were astronomical. Sarah put me in charge of the entire global marketing launch. For 6 months, I barely saw daylight. My life was a blur of conference calls with different time zones, market research, and endless strategic planning sessions. I lived and breathed that project. James was my rock through it all, ordering takeout when I forgot to eat, quizzing me on my presentation notes, and reminding me to breathe. The launch was a phenomenal success. It didn't just meet expectations, it shattered them. The product sold out in the first week. Our company's stock price soared, It was the kind of career-defining win you dream about. And a few weeks later, Sarah called me into her office. She closed the door, looked me straight in the eye, and slid an envelope across the desk. "The board approved this personally," she said. "This is for you, for what you did." Inside was a bonus check. But it wasn't just any bonus. The number on it made my hands shake. $250,000, $250,000. It felt unreal, like a typo. That night, I showed it to James. His eyes went wide, and then he just burst out laughing, a huge, joyful laugh that filled our entire house. He picked me up and spun me around the kitchen. "You did it! I knew you could do it!" he yelled. After we calmed down, he sat me down at our dining table, his expression turning serious. He held my hand and looked at the check again. "This is life-changing money, Amelia," he said quietly. "This is freedom money. And it is yours, not theirs, not the family emergency fund, not a loan for Troy's next failed business venture. It's yours." He knew exactly what I was thinking. My first instinct, drilled into me since childhood, was how this could solve my family's problems. Troy was in some credit card debt again, and my parents were talking about needing a new roof. I was already mentally portioning it out. James saw it on my face. "No," he said, his voice firm but kind. "This is your weapon. Your secret weapon. We don't tell them. Not a word. We put this away, we invest it, and we let it grow. This is your escape hatch, for whenever you decide you're finally done." So that's what we did. We opened a separate investment account under my name. We never spoke of it again, not even to our closest friends. To my family, we were just the same old James and Amelia, living comfortably but not extravagantly in our modest Portland house. They had no idea I was sitting on a small fortune. They had no idea that while they saw me as the ever-reliable, slightly boring daughter who was good enough, I was secretly building a fortress made of my own hard work, my own success, and a secret they would never, ever know, until the day I decided to use it. The fortress I had built for myself, that secret life of success and financial independence, felt a million miles away the day my world ended. It started with an adventure. James was offered a 6-month contract with a tech firm in Singapore. It was a huge opportunity, the kind that could set us up for life. I arranged to work remotely for part of the time so we could be together. We were so excited, talking about the food we'd try, the places we'd see. We were invincible. Or so I thought. 2 months in, I was back in Portland when I got the call that shattered my universe into a million pieces. James had complained of a headache during our morning video chat. "Just stress," he'd said. 8 hours later, his coworker called me from James's phone. He had collapsed. A brain aneurysm. I booked the first flight I could, a frantic, 26-hour journey across the globe, praying to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in. But by the time I arrived, he was already in a coma. The doctors used words like catastrophic and irreversible. For 5 days, I sat by his hospital bed in that cold, sterile room, holding his hand and talking to him, telling him about our future, the one that was slipping away with every beep of the machines. He never woke up. He was just gone. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. And I was completely, terrifyingly alone. Navigating a foreign hospital system while your heart is breaking is a special kind of hell. Every form was a puzzle, every conversation a struggle through translation apps. And through it all, I called my family, desperate for a lifeline, for some small piece of comfort. But the calls were always short. They were praying for me, they said, before rushing off the phone. And then the weird questions started. It was my mother, mostly. In the middle of my describing the impossible task of arranging a death certificate, she'd interrupt. "Amelia, have you found James's life insurance policy yet?" I was so stunned I couldn't even answer at first. The next day it was, "Will the company be paying for the arrangements? These things can get very expensive." And then, the one that really sent a chill down my spine. "So, once everything is settled there, what are your plans for the house in Portland?" Plans for the house? I just lost my husband. Our house was the last thing on my mind. I tried to brush it off. Grief makes people say strange things, I told myself. They're just being practical. But a small, cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a sense that something was wrong, something beyond just their usual brand of thoughtlessness. The day of the funeral, I called them, hoping for a final word of love, of support. My father told me a last-minute flight was prohibitively expensive. My brother had a critical work obligation he couldn't possibly miss. So I stood there alone, watching them lower the love of my life into the ground, surrounded by strangers. I had never felt so abandoned. My journey home was a 30-hour nightmare. Delays, missed connections. I was running on nothing but grief and sheer will. 3 days before my final flight, I messaged our family group chat with my exact itinerary. Thumbs up emojis from my parents, a text from Troy asking if I was bringing back any souvenirs. I clarified my arrival time twice more. No one offered to come. Not one person. As the plane touched down in Portland, I made one last, desperate attempt. I texted, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" And that's when the first real crack in my lifelong denial appeared. My brother, Troy, replied almost instantly, "We are busy. Try Uber." Busy. Then my mother added, "Why didn't you plan better?" The words swam in front of my blurry, exhausted eyes. I typed "no worries" while my entire world silently collapsed. Standing at the baggage claim, feeling like a ghost in my own life, I mindlessly scrolled through my phone. And then I saw it. A picture on Instagram. It was from Troy's girlfriend, Lisa. A selfie of the two of them, grinning, holding up glasses of wine at a fancy steakhouse. The caption read, "Celebrating my man on closing his big deal. You're number one." The timestamp was from 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes later, he was too busy to pick up his widowed sister from the airport. The steak, the wine, the celebration, it all felt like a slap in the face. My grief was an inconvenience to their celebration. A weather report on the airport TV caught my attention. A reporter was warning of an Arctic blast hitting Portland that night, with record-low temperatures. A new wave of anxiety hit me. The house. Had they remembered to take care of the house? I quickly opened the group chat again. "I just saw the news," I typed, my fingers clumsy. "They're saying it's going to freeze tonight. Did you guys remember to leave the heat on at the house?" Minutes crawled by. The three little dots appeared and disappeared under Troy's name. Finally, a reply. Yeah, it's handled. Stop worrying about little things." Little things. That's what he called it. The condescending, dismissive tone was unmistakable. He just wanted me to shut up so he could get back to his steak. I felt a surge of anger so hot it almost choked me. The injustice of it all. Sitting there, surrounded by my dead husband's belongings, while my own family lied to my face. The Uber ride cost me $78. The house was just as I'd feared. It was dark, and it was cold. The air was stale and dead. Mail was overflowing from the slot in the door. The fridge was a wasteland of expired condiments. Every single promise they had made to look after the place was broken. I dragged myself upstairs and collapsed into an armchair, too broken to even get into the bed I had shared with James. I woke up the next morning to a sound I will never forget. A gurgling, rushing sound is coming from downstairs. I stumbled down the stairs, and my heart stopped. Water was pouring from the ceiling in the kitchen. It was cascading down the walls, pooling on the floor. The pipe had frozen overnight, just as the news had warned. And it had burst. Troy's casual, "It's handled," echoed in my ears. A lie. It was all a lie. They hadn't done a single thing. Standing there in 3 inches of ice-cold water, I called an emergency plumber, my voice shaking. They were backed up for days. The earliest they could come was Tuesday. Tuesday. My next call was to Troy. I told him the house was flooded, that I had nowhere to go. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Wow, that sucks," he finally said, his voice laced with annoyance, not concern. "Actually, tonight is really bad timing. Lisa and I have clients coming over." Clients. He chose clients over his sister, who was standing in a flooded house, just back from burying her husband. I hung up and called my parents. The excuses came even faster. "Oh, honey," my mother chirped. "You know we would, but the bridge club is meeting here tomorrow, and we've spent all day preparing." Bridge club. My world was literally and figuratively drowning, and she was worried about the bridge club. She suggested I get a hotel. And that was the moment. The final, brutal, undeniable moment of clarity. Standing there, shivering in the dark, my feet numb from the icy water, I finally understood. It wasn't just thoughtlessness. It wasn't just selfishness. This was a complete and utter abandonment. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had actively chosen everything else over me, at every single turn. My grief, my safety, my well-being, it was all just an inconvenience to them. A little thing. At this point in the story, I honestly don't have the words for what that felt like. If you are feeling as outraged as I am right now, help me out and comment with one word to describe the actions of this family. But instead of breaking me, that outrage, it turned into something else. Something cold and hard and focused. It turned into fuel. After my mother suggested I get a hotel, something inside me just snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clean break. The part of me that had spent 35 years making excuses for them, hoping for them, waiting for them, it just died right there, standing in the freezing water. I ended the call without another word. The tears stopped. The shaking stopped. There was only a profound, terrifying calm. I looked around at the destruction, at the water seeping into the beautiful hardwood floors that James and I had picked out together. This wasn't just a burst pipe. This was a physical manifestation of their neglect, a monument to their indifference. And in that silence, a single thought echoed in my mind, clear as a bell. Enough. This is the last time. They made their choice. My body was on autopilot, but my mind was racing, connecting dots I had refused to see for years. My mother's weird questions in Singapore, about the life insurance, about the house. My brother's casual lies, my father's silence. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. And for the first time, I allowed myself to see it for what it was. They weren't just thoughtless, they were calculating. My tragedy wasn't a source of grief for them, it was an opportunity. An inconvenience, yes, but also an opportunity. The house, the insurance money. Suddenly, their strange behavior made a chilling kind of sense. The cold that seeped into my bones wasn't just from the water anymore. It was the cold of a horrifying realization. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I had one last idea, a desperate long shot. I redialed the number for the emergency plumbing service, my thumb hovering over the call button. What was I even hoping for? That a slot had magically opened up? That someone would take pity on me? I hit the button. The same dispatcher from before answered, her voice polite but firm. "Portland Emergency Plumbing. This is Brenda." "Hi, Brenda," I started, my own voice sounding distant and strange. "It's me again, Amelia Henderson. I know you said you were booked, but I—" And then, the dam broke. The calm shattered, and everything I had been holding back just came pouring out. It wasn't just about the pipe anymore. It was about everything. "My husband just died," I sobbed, the words raw and ragged. "I just flew back from his funeral in Singapore. I've been traveling for over 30 hours. My house is flooded, there's no heat. And my family is busy. My brother has clients, and my parents have a bridge game. I told her everything: the text messages, the Instagram story, the lies about the heat, the years of being treated like an afterthought. I unloaded a lifetime of hurt and betrayal onto this stranger over the phone. When I finally finished, there was a long silence on the other end. I thought she had hung up. I wouldn't have blamed her. But then, she spoke, and her voice had changed. The professional politeness was gone, replaced by a raw, simmering anger, an anger that was on my behalf. "Ma'am, Amelia," she said, her voice low and intense. "What you're describing, that's not just a run of bad luck. That is neglect. What your family has done it's unthinkable. I can't, in good conscience, just tell you to wait until Tuesday." She took a deep breath. "Listen to me. I'm not supposed to do this. This is way outside my job description. But I can't just hang up this phone. I have a friend. His name is David Miller. He's an investigative reporter for the local news. He covers stories just like this. People who fall through the cracks. People who get taken advantage of by the system or by their own families. He can make calls. He can put pressure on people. He can get you the help you need right now. He can make sure people know what's happening." She paused, and I could hear the urgency in her voice. "Amelia, do I have your permission to call him, to tell him your story?" A month ago, a week ago, even an hour ago, I would have been horrified. My family's sacred image, our private business, aired out for the world to see? Never. But standing there, at the absolute bottom, with nothing left to lose, the thought of protecting them was laughable. Protect them from what? The consequences of their own actions? What did I care about their reputation anymore? What had their reputation ever done for me? "Yes," I whispered, the word tasting like freedom and ash in my mouth. "I don't care anymore. Do whatever you think is right." "Okay," Brenda said, her voice full of a grim determination. "You just stay put and stay safe, Amelia. Help is on the way." I had no idea that help would arrive in the form of a news van and a media firestorm that would burn my old life to the ground. After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of detachment. The decision was made. The die was cast. There was a weird, reckless energy buzzing through me. I couldn't just stand there and wait. I had to do something. My eyes fell on the basement door. The electrical panel was down there. Maybe, just maybe, I could get a breaker flipped, get some heat working in at least one part of the house. It was a stupid, desperate idea, born from exhaustion and a need to reclaim some tiny sliver of control. The basement stairs were slick with a thin film of water. I held onto the railing tightly, using my phone's flashlight to cut through the musty darkness. The concrete floor was partially flooded, the icy water seeping into my already soaked shoes, reaching my ankles. The air was thick and heavy. I sloshed my way towards the far wall where the gray metal box of the electrical panel was mounted. As I reached out to open the little metal door, my foot slipped on the slick concrete. My body pitched forward. My hand shot out instinctively to brace myself. It landed flat against the cold metal of the panel box, and then a violent, blinding jolt. Electricity shot up my arm, a white-hot agony that seized every muscle in my body. It threw me backwards like a doll. The last thing I remembered was the back of my head hitting something incredibly hard. Then, for a moment, a flash of James's face, smiling, and then, just darkness. Complete and total darkness. They arrived on the third day. I knew they would. The media attention had become a constant low-grade hum outside the hospital walls, and I could almost feel their panic growing with every news cycle. The door to my room pushed open, and they entered not like a concerned family, but like a clumsy damage control team arriving at a PR disaster. My brother Troy came in first, his face a mask of frantic energy. He was holding his phone like a shield, scrolling furiously. My mother followed, her expression a carefully constructed performance of maternal anguish, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. My father trailed behind them, his face grim and unreadable, looking more like a man walking into a difficult business negotiation than his daughter's hospital room. They arranged themselves around my bed, creating a suffocating perimeter. The air crackled with unspoken agendas. My mother was the first to speak, her voice oozing a theatrical sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Amelia, my poor baby," she cooed, reaching out to touch my arm. I didn't flinch, I just watched her, my expression as neutral as a blank sheet of paper. "We were so worried. We came as soon as we heard. This whole thing, it's just a terrible, terrible misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That was the narrative they had chosen. Troy looked up from his phone, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for hidden cameras. "Yeah, Ames, the media is just blowing this whole thing out of proportion," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. "They're making it sound like we abandoned you. It's insane. We were just busy. You know how it is." He was talking to me, but his words were clearly meant for any nurses or doctors who might be listening in the hallway. My father, ever the pragmatist, got straight to what he considered the point. "The important thing is that you're safe," he said, his tone clipped and businesslike. "We've decided it's best if you come home with us once you're discharged. We'll take care of everything. The house, the insurance. You won't have to worry about a thing." And there it was. The play. The beautifully orchestrated performance was designed to re-establish control, to smooth over the ugly truth with a veneer of familial concern. They believed they were walking into the same old dynamic. They would decide for my own good, and I, the responsible, ever-accommodating daughter, would gratefully accept. They would look like heroes, swooping in to save me from my own tragic incompetence, and the nasty little story on the news would simply fade away. They were so confident, so sure of their power over me. They had no idea the stage they were standing on was a trap, and I was the one holding the rope to the curtain. My silence seemed to unnerve them. It wasn't the reaction they were expecting. They were used to my tears, my quiet acceptance, my efforts to smooth things over. This stillness was new. It was a language they didn't understand. Just then, my doctor, Dr. Reynolds, entered the room, clipboard in hand. It was perfect timing. My mother immediately snapped into character, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, doctor, thank you for coming. We were just telling Amelia we'll be taking her home with us as soon as she's cleared. Our family always sticks together in a crisis." Dr. Reynolds gave a professional nod, his eyes scanning my chart. He looked up, but his gaze wasn't directed at my mother. It was directed at me. "Amelia," he said, his voice calm and steady, "your recovery is our top priority. That means a stable, stress-free environment. What are your thoughts on a discharge plan? What support system do you feel is best for you?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to my family's assumed authority. Before I could answer, a nurse, the same kind woman named Sarah from my first day, came in. She smiled at me warmly before turning to my mother. "Ms. Patel, the hospital's social worker, has put together a comprehensive file of alternative resources for Amelia, should she need them," she said, her tone perfectly neutral. "It includes options for temporary housing, in-home care, and grief counseling." Alternatives. The word landed in the middle of the room like a grenade. My mother's face tightened. "Alternatives?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Why would she need alternatives? She's coming home with her family, where she belongs." Sarah didn't look at my mother. She kept her eyes locked on mine. And in that moment, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't felt in years. The choice was mine, not theirs, not what would look best on the news, not what would make them feel better about themselves. Mine. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence stretch until it was almost uncomfortable. Then, I turned my head slightly and looked at Sarah. "I'd like to hear about the alternatives," I said. My voice was quiet, but it echoed in the sudden dead silence of the room. The effect was instantaneous. Troy froze, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. My father, who had been staring out the window, turned around slowly, a deep frown creasing his forehead. The performance had just gone completely off script. "Amelia," my mother finally managed, her voice a strained whisper. "Don't be ridiculous, after everything we've done for you." And that was the opening I had been waiting for. "Done for me?" I asked, my voice still quiet, but now edged with something cold and sharp. "Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you've done." I looked at my mother. "When my husband was dying in a hospital halfway around the world, you were too busy to get on a plane. You asked me about his life insurance policy while I was still holding his hand." I turned my gaze to Troy. "When I buried him alone, you were too busy with critical work to be there. When I landed after 30 hours of hell, you were too busy celebrating a business deal to give me a ride. You lied to my face about the heat in my house." Finally, I looked at my father. "And you? You said nothing. You did nothing. You let it all happen." My voice never rose. I didn't scream or cry. I simply stated the facts, one after another, like a prosecutor laying out an airtight case. Each word was a perfectly aimed stone, shattering the fragile glass house of their denial. Troy stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "That is completely unfair. We didn't know how serious things were." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," I shot back, my voice cutting through his protest. "Not once, not a single time did any of you ask me, 'Amelia, are you okay?' Not once did you offer real help without an excuse attached. You didn't need to see me on the news to know I was a grieving widow. You just chose not to see it." "We have always supported you," my mother insisted, her voice rising with indignation. "Maybe not in the exact way you wanted, but families can't just drop everything for every little crisis." "Burying my husband is a little crisis?" I asked, letting the question hang in the air. "My house flooding and losing power in a blizzard is a little crisis." "You're being hysterical," my father said, stepping forward. "Grief is making you say things you don't mean. When you're thinking more clearly—" "I have never," I interrupted, looking each of them dead in the eye, "thought more clearly in my entire life. For the first time, I see this family for what it is, and I'm done. I'm done pretending. I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being the responsible one, and I am done being your victim." I turned back to the nurse and the doctor, who had remained silent witnesses to the entire exchange. "I will not be going home with them," I stated, my voice ringing with a finality that left no room for argument. "Please, tell me about those alternatives." And just like that, the power in the room shifted. It flowed away from them, with their blustering and their excuses, and it settled, calm and heavy, right where I was lying. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock, fury, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear. The puppet had just cut her own strings, and they had absolutely no idea what she was going to do next. My final declaration, that I would not be going home with them, hung in the sterile air of the hospital room like a verdict. For a solid 10 seconds, nobody moved. It was as if I had spoken in a foreign language they couldn't comprehend. My mother's face, which had been a mask of strained sympathy, crumbled into pure, unfiltered disbelief. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The performance was over. The real reactions were beginning. "What? What are you saying?" she finally stammered, her voice a high-pitched squeak. "This is a joke, right? Amelia, this isn't funny." My brother Troy was the next to crack. The cool, defensive posture he'd been holding dissolved into raw panic. His eyes were wide, darting from my face to the doctor's, as if looking for an adult to tell him this was all a bad dream. "You can't be serious," he blurted out, taking a step forward. "You're choosing, what, strangers? A hotel? Over your own family? After everything that's happened, you're going to make this even worse for us?" "For us. Not for me." The choice of words was so telling, so perfectly, unconsciously selfish. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was worried about the optics. He was worried about how this would look on the inevitable follow-up news report. My father, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke. His voice was low and dangerous, the one he used when a business deal was going south. "Amelia, that's enough," he said, his eyes narrowed. "You've made your point. You're upset, we understand, but you are not going to embarrass this family any further. Dr. Reynolds, my daughter is clearly not in her right mind. She's been through a trauma. We will be taking her home." It was a power play, a blatant attempt to dismiss my decision as the ramblings of a hysterical woman. But the doctor didn't even flinch. He simply looked at me, raising an eyebrow in a silent question. I met his gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "No." The doctor turned back to my father. "In the state of Oregon," he said, his tone as crisp and cool as a winter morning, "a patient who is of sound mind has the absolute right to make their own medical and discharge decisions. Amelia is of sound mind. The decision is hers." Checkmate. The look on my father's face was a mixture of fury and utter shock. He was a man who was used to being in charge, to having his declarations treated as law. To be so calmly and publicly overruled was a blow he clearly wasn't prepared for. The nurse, Sarah, gently stepped forward. "Perhaps it would be best if we gave Amelia some time to rest," she said, her voice firm but polite. "We can discuss the discharge plan in more detail later." It was a clear dismissal. She was kicking them out. They shuffled out of the room, defeated and enraged. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a moment, there was blessed silence. But it didn't last long. Through the closed door, I could hear their voices, rising in frantic, angry whispers in the hallway. I couldn't make out all the words, but the panicked tone was unmistakable. I heard Troy's voice, sharp with fear. "My clients saw the news story. This will ruin me." Then my mother's, on the verge of tears. "What will I tell the bridge club? Everyone will be talking." Then my father's, a low, furious rumble, trying to regain control. "We need to get ahead of this. Call the hospital administrator. Call our lawyer." They weren't talking about me. They weren't discussing my health, my recovery, or the profound grief I was drowning in. They were huddled in the hallway of the hospital where their daughter lay recovering from a near-death experience, and they were talking about damage control, about their reputations, about their social standing. It was the most clarifying moment of my entire life. Listening to their panicked whispers, I felt a strange sense of pity for them. They were so trapped in their own little world of appearances that they were completely blind to the real human tragedy unfolding right in front of them. After about 10 minutes, the door opened again. It was my mother, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, but her eyes were hard with anger. She marched to my bedside. The performance was officially over. This was the real her. "I hope you're happy, Amelia," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You have single-handedly destroyed this family, all of this public humiliation, all because we were too busy to give you a ride from the airport. You have always been so selfish, so dramatic." I just stared at her, my silence a mirror reflecting the absurdity of her words at her. I had destroyed the family? I was selfish? The woman whose entire life had been a series of sacrifices for their comfort and convenience was now being called selfish. The hypocrisy was so breathtaking, it was almost beautiful in its purity. "Your father's business partners are calling him," she continued, her voice rising. "Troy's boss is asking questions. Our friends are looking at us with pity. You've made us into villains, all because you couldn't just handle your own problems like an adult." I still said nothing. My silence was my new weapon. It was a vacuum, and she was desperately trying to fill it with her noise, her blame, her rewriting of history. She was trying to provoke a reaction, to pull me back into the old dance of arguing and defending myself. but I refused to take the floor. When she finally ran out of steam, sputtering into an angry silence, my father appeared in the doorway. He tried a different tactic, the good cop. He walked over, his expression carefully arranged into one of paternal concern. "Honey," he said, his voice soft and reasonable, "your mother is just upset. We're all under a lot of stress. We know you're grieving. You're not thinking straight. Let's just Let's just calm down. We can fix this. All you have to do is tell the hospital you've changed your mind. Tell them you were confused. We'll put out a statement. We'll say the media twisted things. We can make this all go away." He was offering me a deal, a chance to crawl back into the box they had built for me. All I had to do was take the blame, pretend I was the hysterical, confused little girl, and their world could go back to normal. He was trying to manipulate me with a false sense of peace, to trade my newfound clarity for the familiar comfort of their control. He was asking me to unsee what I had seen, to unknow what I now knew. I finally looked up at him. I looked from his pleading face to my mother's angry one, to Troy, who was hovering in the hallway, looking like a cornered animal. And I felt nothing. The emotional hooks they had always used on me, guilt, obligation, the desperate need for their approval, they just slid right off. There was nothing left for them to grab onto. "No," I said. My voice was calm and steady. It held no anger, no hysteria, no grief, just the simple, unshakable weight of a final decision. "I am not confused. In fact, for the first time in my life, I am thinking with perfect clarity." My father recoiled as if I had slapped him. My mother let out a gasp. This was the one thing they weren't prepared for. Not my anger, not my tears, but my certainty. They had lost control, completely and irrevocably. Their attempts to blame, to manipulate, to bargain, they had all failed. They were left with nothing but the ugly truth of their own actions, exposed for all the world to see. And in their eyes, I saw the dawn of a new, terrifying reality. The safety net they had always taken for granted, the daughter who would always be there to clean up their messes, was gone. And they were finally, truly, on their own. After my final refusal, a heavy, defeated silence fell over my family. They looked from me to the doctor, then back to me, their faces blank with the slow dawning horror that their control had completely evaporated. They had no more cards to play. Their blame hadn't worked. Their manipulation hadn't worked. Their authority had been publicly and politely dismantled by the hospital staff. They were powerless, and they hated it. Ms. Patel, the social worker, chose that moment to re-enter the room, her timing impeccable. She carried a folder and had an expression of serene professionalism, as if she hadn't just been standing outside the door during a family implosion. She smiled kindly at me, pointedly ignoring my parents and brother. "Amelia," she began, her voice a soothing balm in the tense room, "I have some updates for you. The community response has been, well, it's been quite remarkable." She opened her folder. "A local hotel, the Riverview downtown, has offered you a complimentary 2-week stay in one of their suites while your home is being repaired. A 5-star restoration company has already dispatched a team to your house to begin the water extraction and damage assessment, completely pro bono, and a gourmet meal delivery service has arranged to provide you with 3 meals a day for the next month, no charge." With every offer she listed, I could feel my family shrinking. Each act of generosity from a stranger was a fresh indictment of their failure. The hotel room was the sanctuary they had denied me. The restoration company was the help they had refused to provide. The meals were the basic care they hadn't even thought to offer them. Furthermore, Ms. Patel continued, a local grief support network has reached out, and we've connected you with a therapist who specializes in trauma and bereavement. Your first appointment is covered, and your neighbor Diane has mobilized a few other people on your street. They'll be checking on the house, collecting your mail, and putting together a care package for you at the hotel." She looked up from her folder, her eyes meeting mine. "You have a lot of people in your corner, Amelia. You are not alone." I looked past her, at the stunned faces of my family. They looked like they had been physically struck. This outpouring of support from strangers, from the very community whose judgment they so desperately feared, was a consequence they had never anticipated. They had assumed I would be isolated, helpless, and forced to come crawling back to them. Instead, a safety net I never knew existed had materialized out of thin air, woven together by the compassion of people who owed me nothing. I started, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't even name. "I accept. All of it. Thank you." Troy finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. "This is ridiculous. You're going to accept charity from strangers instead of help from your own blood?" I turned my head on the pillow and looked at my brother. Really looked at him. I didn't see the golden boy anymore. I saw a weak, terrified man, panicking because his lifelong support system was crumbling. "I'm choosing kindness over obligation, Troy," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm choosing genuine support over a reluctant performance. I'm choosing people who show up." That was it. That was the final blow. My mother gathered her purse, her movements stiff and jerky with fury. "Fine," she snapped. "When you come to your senses, you know where to find us. But don't expect us to drop everything again when you decide you need us." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "That's exactly the point, Mom," I replied softly. "I never could expect that. And now, I never will." As they filed out of the room, a parade of defeated anger, I felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't happiness. It was the quiet, solid feeling of a massive weight being lifted from my soul. The weight of their expectations, their judgments, their constant, draining needs. For the first time in my life, I wasn't responsible for their feelings. I wasn't responsible for their public image. I was only responsible for myself, and for my own healing. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't back down. I chose myself over their comfort. This was a huge moment. If you support this powerful decision, drop A or A in the comments to send some strength her way on this journey. That support, even the idea of it, was exactly what I needed to start rebuilding my life. In the quiet that followed their departure, Nurse Sarah came back into the room. She adjusted my pillows and checked my IV. "That took incredible courage," she said, her voice soft. "Setting boundaries is the hardest and most important thing you can ever do." "It doesn't feel like courage," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "It feels like giving up." "You're not giving up," she corrected gently, her hand resting on my arm for a moment. "You're permitting yourself to heal. There's a big difference." And she was right. The days that followed were the beginning of a new kind of existence. I was discharged from the hospital, not to the cold, empty house of my old life, but to a warm, beautiful suite at the Riverview Hotel. There was a vase of fresh flowers on the desk, with a card signed by the entire nursing staff from my floor. My neighbor, Diane, a woman I'd only ever exchanged polite waves with, was there to meet me. She had brought a bag with a new toothbrush, some comfortable pajamas, and a Tupperware container of homemade chicken soup. She didn't stay long. She just hugged Meg, told me to call if I needed anything at all, and left. It was a simple, uncomplicated act of kindness that felt more real and more loving than anything my own mother had done for me in years. That evening, my boss, Sarah, called. Not to talk about work, but just to check in. She told me to take all the time I needed, that my job was secure, and that the entire company was rooting for me. My lawyer, Catherine Shaw, sent over the legal documents we had discussed. They were ready for my family to sign. She was my bulldog, my advocate, protecting my future. Brenda, the dispatcher from the plumbing company, even sent a text message. "Heard you're out of the hospital. So glad you're safe. thinking of you. All of these people, my nurse, my neighbor, my boss, my lawyer, a stranger from a plumbing company, they had become my family. A family I hadn't been born into, but one that had formed around me in my darkest hour. They weren't bound by blood or obligation. They were bound by simple, human decency. They were my chosen family. And as I sat in that quiet hotel room, watching the sun set over the river, I realized I hadn't given up on anything. I had just finally stopped searching for water in a well that had been dry my whole life, and instead, I had found an entire ocean of support I never knew was waiting for me. It's been a year since the day my old life burned down. The seasons have changed, and so have I. The house, once a scene of devastation and neglect, is now a sanctuary. The restoration company didn't just fix the damage, they helped me rebuild. New floors, fresh paint, and a smart thermostat I can control from my phone. It's brighter now, more open. It's my space, filled not with ghosts of the past, but with the promise of a future I am building for myself. My healing journey wasn't a straight line. It was messy and painful, and full of days where just getting out of bed felt like a monumental victory. But my chosen family, the incredible network of people who stepped up when my own blood stepped away, they never wavered. Diane from across the street still brings me soup on rainy days. Sarah, my boss, became more than a mentor. She became a friend, a confidant. And I continued to see the therapist Ms. Patel connected me with, slowly untangling the complicated knots of grief and a lifetime of familial conditioning. 6 months ago, I did something that felt like the first real step into my new life. Using James's life insurance policy and that secret bonus fund I had guarded for so long, I established the James Henderson Memorial Scholarship at our old university. It's not just any scholarship, it has a specific provision: an emergency fund for students studying abroad who face an unexpected family crisis, ensuring they have the financial means to get home, or for their family to get to them, without a moment's hesitation. I turned the worst moment of my life into a promise that someone else would never have to endure the same pain. It felt like the perfect way to honor the man who had always believed in me by creating a legacy of support in his name. As for my biological family, the consequences of their actions were swift and decisive. My lawyer, Catherine, presented them with the financial agreement we had drafted. Faced with the threat of further public exposure and potential legal action, they signed it without a fight, severing any claim they might have thought they had to my assets. The court of public opinion was just as unforgiving. I heard through the family grapevine that Troy lost his biggest client after the story aired. The reputational damage he was so worried about became a self-fulfilling prophecy. My parents, who had built their lives around their social standing, found themselves ostracized. Friends stopped calling, invitations stopped arriving. They ended up selling their large family home and downsizing, their world shrinking to match their character. A few months ago, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my father. It wasn't an apology filled with excuses. It was a simple, stark acknowledgement of his failure. "The man you married would be proud of the woman you have become in his absence," he wrote. "I have no excuses to offer, only a late and insufficient recognition of the truth." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I didn't respond right away, but eventually, I agreed to have lunch with him, just the two of us. It was awkward and strained, but it was a start. A new relationship, built on the rubble of the old one, with clear, unshakable boundaries. My mother and brother have remained silent. I accept that. I can't change them, but I can change how much power they have over my life. And the answer is now, none. Standing here today, in the garden James and I planted together, I've learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life. Your worth is not a reflection of how others treat you. It is not determined by their capacity to love you or their willingness to show up. It is inherent. It is absolute. And you are the only one who gets to define it. Family isn't always the one you are born into. Sometimes, family is the nurse who holds your hand in the dark. It's the neighbor who brings you soup. It's the dispatcher on the other end of the phone who chooses to get involved. Family is a choice. It's an action. It's about who shows up when the whole world is walking out. My story had a painful beginning, but I am writing a new ending. An ending filled with peace, with purpose, and with a chosen family that reminds me every day that I am not, and never was, alone. And that brings me to you. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with a family member who took you for granted? How did you navigate that painful conversation? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the courage they need. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice. Because your story matters, your boundaries are valid, and healing is always possible. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me.